All right. With the trade deadline, usually comes some teams extending players, giving out some contract extensions. We're going to talk about a few that happened in the past few days. This isn't every contract that's been handed out or every extension. For example, Gagovich of the Florida Panthers was extended to, I believe, 2 years. He is not on this board. These are more notable players that may have been moved at the trade deadline come the right deal, but now will probably not be moved. 99% chance they will not be moved at the trade deadline. You don't usually want to extend a player and then trade him. That's not usually the best look for a GM, or whatever. But let's talk about it. This goes from oldest to newest, and remember these are cap hits, not actual salary the player will be making. From our perspective, we only really care about the salary cap in general. So there may be bonuses in here or what have you that may not be factored into the actual cap hit or may come as a cap penalty in following seasons. Should bonuses be hit or whatever. So we're not getting into that right now. Jonathan Quick of the New York Rangers signs a 1-year extension worth $1.275 million. I believe the contract's for $1.3 million, but the cap hit $1.275 million. Quick having a good bounce back season as the backup to Igor Shesterkin in New York, playing behind a solid defense core. Now we see teams with solid defense cores and teams that play defensive hockey have goaltenders with pretty solid stats. We want to look at the Boston Bruins. We want to look at the Vancouver Canucks, for example, playing excellent team defense this year. Vegas Golden Knights, Florida Panthers for the most part, Tampa Bay Lightning, right? So these goaltenders are excellent goaltenders, but they also have a good team in front of them, which really helps enhance their stats to above league average, well above league average in some of these instances. So Jonathan Quick, beneficiary, it's a good fit. It works. He's staying there for another year. I like it. He's not going to be moved. Nashville. I'm wearing the Nashville jersey. Can't even see it. But under the radar signing, Tommy Novak signs an extension for 3 years at $3.5 million. Novak can play in that top six, spent some time, especially last year, on that first line with Philip Forsberg. Looked solid. And if he can live up to flashes of brilliance he's shown, that could be a steal of a contract. I think it's still already a bit of a bargain for how much he produces on that Nashville Predators offense. I think it's a solid signing for Nashville to keep that guy around at that cap hit for 3 years. This may be more of a bridge deal to see if it's sustainable, but nonetheless, I think it's a solid deal. Good job, Nashville. Minnesota Wild signing Zach Bogosian for another 2 years at a cap hit of $1.25 million. Zach Bogosian's like 31 or something. I don't have his exact age. He's like 30. He's between 30 and 33. Like, he's still pretty young, ish, middle-aged, I guess, for an NHL player, but a defenseman. I don't have an issue with the term, 2 years, great. I don't have an issue with the cap hit, $1.25 million for kind of a third-pairing defenseman. He's a great guy. Damon Hunt, he's a Wild defenseman playing in the AHL with the Iowa Wild. Raved about Zach Bogosian and how willing Bogosian was to help him and teach him and kind of help him evolve into an NHL caliber defenseman, which is really cool. So I think it speaks volumes to Zach Bogosian. I think he's a great guy in general. He can provide a little bit of grit. He can provide defensive defense. As long as he's not stick handling through his legs in front of the other team's net, which he recently did, that led to a turnover. I think it's a solid signing, cap hit. My issue with this is not necessarily the player, the contract, the cap hit, the timing, the fit. It is the timing. It's the timing of the GM of the Minnesota Wild, Bill Guerin. You're signing all these players to extensions. This one is the only one so far that doesn't have a no movement clause or no trade clause involved. But who are you going to trade? You're a Minnesota Wild team that is not going to make the playoffs. You need to be selling pieces off. You have some of these young guys that really should be coming into the lineup, even on defense, right? You have Declan Chisholm, which you just picked up off waivers, who's playing pretty well. You have Damon Hunt, Ryan O'Rourke, Carson Lambos down in the AHL, right? You have all these guys that are going to start pushing their way up to the NHL. Damon Hunt should probably be a regular in the NHL at this point as well. So I don't have an issue with this, but what is happening? What are they doing? So it's kind of a head scratcher. Again, I don't have anything bad to say about this contract in general. It's more the timing of the general manager, what is going on here. Maybe there's more to come. Maybe there's a move that will be made. One of the players will be moved out on defense that will allow someone like a Damon Hunt to come up into the lineup, or maybe a Carson Lambos can be like a number 7 defenseman next year or something. We'll see what happens, but weird with the Minnesota Wild this year. Next up, Washington Capitals signed an extension to Rasmus Sandin, 5 years, $4.6 million. Sandin's all right. I think this is a contract that is fair and will age well. He's played well in Washington. He fits their system. He provides some offense. His defensive game continues to get better every year. So I think this is going to be a contract that it may seem depends who you ask, right? For me personally, this might be a little much for now, but I think it'll age better. It'll age fine. That can be a controversial statement. I get that, so don't come at me. Your opinion is just as valid on that. But Sandin, I think it's a solid contract for the team and the player. That's great. I'm glad this has worked out. The Liljegren-Sandin trade to Toronto and Washington. I think Washington's fared pretty well in this as well. Next up, Philadelphia Flyers signing defenseman Nick Seeler to a 4-year contract, $2.7 million of an annual average value. This is a great contract. This is a guy, Nick Seeler, who really plays solid defensive defense. I think he's leading the league in block shots right now. He's physical. He can drop the gloves. He'll play the body. This is a John Tortorella old school type defenseman. I watched him a lot when he started with the Minnesota Wild, and I thought he was great. He was still a little raw talent at that time, but man, he has come into his own in Philadelphia. And you might look at this and be like, well, 2.7 for a third pairing defenseman is a little much. And you'd be right. Technically, it is more than a third pairing defenseman is warranted. But this is a guy that can also step up into the top 4D and play a pretty prominent role. Plays a prominent role on the penalty kill and really plays in those key situations, right? You're up by a goal. The opposing team has their goaltender pulled. It's a 6-on-5 or a 6-on-4. Nick Seeler is one of those guys you can really count on, and those guys are crucial to really securing wins and W's and points in this league. So I don't have an issue with that at all. I was expecting this to be somewhere around the $3.5 million mark, but I think this is a great contract, and as a result, we've seen Walker moved. So Seeler is staying in Philly, and I love that. I love Seeler. Next up, St. Louis Blues re-signing or giving an extension out to Oscar Sundqvist. Sundqvist, fourth line grinder type player, can fluctuate in and out of the league, but I think he spent the whole season with the St. Louis Blues this year. He really fits well with the St. Louis organization. It's a really good fit. We've seen Sundqvist play elsewhere, and it hasn't quite panned out to. It hasn't quite panned out at all. He doesn't really look like an NHL player unless he's playing in St. Louis for the Blues. So extension, 2 years, $1.25 million. I like this deal both for the player and the Blues. I think this is a good fourth line signing for St. Louis. Regardless of if they decide to go into some type of rebuild or retool or compete for a playoff spot, I think Sundqvist is a good guy to have on your team regardless. Also a guy that's won the Stanley Cup, so knows what it takes to win in the playoffs. Last up, Florida with the waivers claim. Waivers claimed Gustav Forsling. He's claimed off waivers, and man, he has played well. Signs an 8-year extension. Yes, 8 years at $5.75 million. I think this is an appropriate contract. You can make the case he's probably worth around $6.5 million. But I think he likes it in Florida. Florida loves to have him, and he's played really well in Florida, really in that top 4 defensive pairing. Has some offense with him. What's he usually around a half point per game? I don't have his stats in front of me. I have Rasmus Sandin's stats in front of me. I don't know why. But overall, this is a solid signing for Florida. I think he's a key piece to that defensive core. And a solid defensive core at that. If they're going to make a run in the playoffs, Gustav Forsling not only can play solid defensive hockey, but he can also really chip in and really help get that offense going. So I'm a fan of really all of these signings, which is incredibly unusual. Especially for me, I love to do the analysis of what's a player worth and all that such. So I'm impressed. Still, I have a question, I guess, with the Wild. Why are you extending players when you should be trading players and building for next year and the end of the buyouts after next year, building for the future? Got to make room for some of your prospects to come in. That's my big question, but the rest makes sense, and I think all are pretty solid signings. So that's it. I just want to touch on that real quick. I appreciate you watching. Take care, all right?